All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Me here talking about real music in real time for real people just like you right there and just like me here. One of the questions I get asked frequently is why does Neal Schon not like Steve Perry? Or why does Steve Perry not like Neal Schon? And why does Steve Perry not like Jonathan Cain? Well, I think Neal Schon pretty much got over whatever was happening between himself and Steve Perry. I think the same can be said for Jonathan Cain. However, it has not reciprocated back. Clearly, this dates back many years. I would say your first indicator would be 1998. I think that was the big year of the breakup, and Steve Perry, lawyered up after his famous phone call with Jonathan Cain, where the band was going to look for other singers. Now, this is very interesting to me because if the band had said in 1988 or 89, after Perry had left the first time, we're going to regroup and we're going to hire a singer. I think they could have gotten away with that because Perry had walked away. If anything, if you want to look at breach of contract or fiduciary duties and so forth, I think at that point Journey would have been in the right. But someone told them, and maybe it was just Perry communicating and saying, look, don't do anything. I can't do this now. I might be back, but I can't do anything right now. Don't call it Journey. Now remember that because Perry says this in 98. Don't call it Journey. If you hire someone other than me, don't call it Journey. Okay? Because that's more or less what his point was. And I think in 88, those guys acknowledged that. And they started this group called Bad English. Dean Castronovo for the first time on the scene. Ricky Phillips, I believe, on bass, who is now with Styx. Pretty sure, not sure, maybe. And obviously, Cain and Schon and John Waite as your lead vocalist. A super group for sure. And they had a #1 song with a Diane Warren tune called When I See You Smile. And something Journey never did, believe it or not. You would think Open Arms or Faithfully, but nope. If you're looking at Billboard Top 40 and you need the professor of rock or whatever to come along and do a video about how this should have been a #1 song, I mean, I lived through it, and there were songs that were really played a lot on the radio, even if they didn't hit #1, didn't necessarily mean that they weren't good songs. And those charts were very fickle because you had a lot of music going up the chart at the same time. Whereas today, especially on these adult contemporary charts, the music will sit there for week after week after week. It's #8, it's #7, it's #8. And it just stays there. There's a new dynamic. There's a different radio station reporting methodology. It's almost like everybody's playing the same thing at the same time and that there's no originality. Yeah. So back in the day, there were stations that said, you know what? I don't like Open Arms. I'm not playing it, or I'll put it in light rotation. I mean, I'm not saying a lot of stations did that, but one of the reasons it got to #2 and stopped was there was a bigger song ahead of it that blocked it. I can't think of the name of the song right now, but I remember I'm thinking to myself, this needs to go to #1. In any event, Journey had so much success during the 1980s, and Perry walks away, and then he calls them and says, hey, I want back in. My theory is that Perry heard that they were looking for a singer and that they were hanging out with a singer. The singer's name was Kevin Chalfant. This is a theory now. I'm not saying I know for sure, but Perry catches wind of this and says, you know what? It's the old boyfriend-girlfriend thing. Well, if I can't have you, he's not going to have you. And that's exactly how I look at that situation. So Perry says, I want back in. And these guys are like, great, Perry wants back in. Now, I think they truly meant great because they got together. They wrote some incredible music, and they were supposed to go out on tour after Trial by Fire. And then we all know about the hiking incident and the hip injury and the surgery and all those different things. And here are these guys, probably right after Bad English, they all got back together and they were, speculating or just like saying, hey, I think we can get this thing back together again. Let's find another singer. One of the things that Neal Schon talks about is, I just wanted to work. We wanted to find somebody who wanted to go to work. Now, for those of you saying, well, that doesn't sound like anybody's really that passionate about music. They just want to go to work. Well, they've already got a lot of great music. And look, Neal Schon, he wants to keep plugging away. And so, by the way, does Steve Perry. He's got solo material that he's probably going to release. Jonathan Cain records music, worship music, and solo albums and so forth. So everybody's kind of still busy, but back in those days, it just seemed as though, well, if Perry really wanted to work, right, he would have just said, you know what, I need to get this surgery. I need to get out there. We have to strike while the iron's hot. See, Perry never wanted to get back on the merry-go-round. He wanted to keep the brand alive. He wanted to be a creative force within that brand. And he did that on Trial by Fire. And then he literally just walked away from it. And you could say, well, it's because he was hurt. He was injured and he had to have surgery and the band was being cruel and mean and so forth. And some of that might be true. But, you still have to think to yourself, okay, we put in all this effort and we're just going to let it go to waste. Tell the guys, give me another 6 months and I don't know those conversations back and forth. I don't know what those conversations were like. I can tell you one thing, though. Those conversations fueled what would become a permanent divorce. Because I'm sure Neal and John was the guy who was making all the phone calls and doing all the sort of heavy lifting and the hard communicating with Perry. And Neal was probably giving instructions to John, and their management was probably giving instructions to John and so forth. And it didn't fly. It didn't work. At the end of it all, Perry didn't want to come back. He wanted to wait. And it was a great narrative too for VH1 is, hey, major surgery is not a band decision, right? So at that point, I think Perry's ego, feelings, relationships with these guys, everything is really in rough shape. And there's a permanent block there. Steve Perry is one of those guys who is very methodical, the way he left, the way he came back. His story is really well told. Whether you believe every portion of that story, you have to think to yourself, all right, you got to give this guy some credit because it's really well thought out. And there's enough truth in there. And then you see things like, hey, he's dating this girl, Kelly Nash, and then poor Kelly passes away from cancer, right? So it's a Hallmark or a Lifetime TV special at that point. And Steve Perry is up there and he's garnering lots of sympathy from people. And a couple of times he was asked the questions that shouldn't be asked, mostly from Andy Green, I think from Rolling Stone, really asked a pretty hard-hitting cluster of questions. And apparently Perry did not take kindly to that. And but there's no explanation. There's no firm, is it a personal problem that he has between Neal Schon and Jonathan Cain? Is it the business end of things in 98 or even prior to that? I mean, what should the band have just retired and Perry say, hey, you need to quit because I'm not there. Just quit. You can do whatever you want to do. And even now, I think people realize that having the Journey brand, even without Steve Perry in it, is better than having any other brand with some other super popular people in it. All right. If you have to start from ground zero and your fan base is aging and they love classic rock and they love nostalgia, and you're going to lay it on them that, hey, this isn't Journey anymore. It's Cain, Schon, and, whoever. We've just renamed it because we had to. Um, how would that have gone over? Probably not so well. But Steve Perry, he got a great deal out of the breakup. That's the thing that I think in hindsight now he should say, look, I did all right financially. You guys, you kept working. You wanted to work. This brand was there before I was in the band, and it was. There's no question about it. And the brand survived after Steve Perry left. I mean, Steve Augeri did a great job. Jeff Scott Soto, obviously a beast. And Arnel Pineda still going strong after, 13, 14 years now he's been in this thing. It's been a long time. So why then? Why the animosity or just Perry's dislike or non-interest or evasive omission based dialogue about all the stuff that happened in the past? He focuses on his personal matters, I think, as a nice way out of answering direct questions about Neal, Schon, and Jonathan Cain. The closest he got really was to say to a reporter, interviewer, that, if someone just wants to work with me because they want to work with me and not because they like me, that doesn't sound like, a sincere relationship. And he was referring to Neal Schon. Neal Schon, good PR move, said, hey, I just want to have a cup of coffee, Steve. That's it. That's it. We can talk music. We can talk whatever you want to talk. But, we could catch up and hang out and be friends again. Now, that's a good move on Neal's part. How true is it? I don't know. Does Neal Schon want to hang out with Steve Perry on a regular basis? Probably not. I think he'd rather hang out with Joe Bonamassa or Joe Satriani or, Steve Lukather or any number of axe slinger guitar players out there. I think that's his wheelhouse. I think he just prefer to be up there on stage with some other guy who's shredding right next to him. But this story will go on because if Journey does have a successful year coming up, because they've got new music, and my guess is they're probably going to book a tour at some point. Things are beginning to open up here and there. And I think their management will piece together some kind of tour, and we'll get to hear this new rhythm section. But, in the backdrop, Steve Perry, he's always going to be there. His life is very complicated. His relationships are very complicated. His music, I think, is inspiring, but also very transparent, like he's wearing his heart on his sleeve a lot. And people are drawn to that kind of honesty. Now, is the honesty a gimmick? Is the sincerity a gimmick? No, I don't think so. I think it's real. I think that's who Steve Perry is. I think he's been true to himself, even if that's been a little schizophrenic over the years. I think he's been true to who he is. And, the old saying is, I don't need this. I'm getting too old for this crap. Why should I even bother with this? I don't want the soap opera. I don't want the drama. I don't want to be out there on the road, 100 dates next year, hanging out in hotel rooms. A lot of guys, when they hit their 70s, if they're going to do any, live gigging, they're kind of very specific about it, and they're very particular about it. Like, oh, well, gee, I don't want to go to this venue because it's a dump. I'd rather play this other venue and I'll be closer to home and I can get home quicker. And those considerations become more important to the artist than, just getting out there and doing as many dates as you can. I mean, not everybody can be Chicago, right? That's Chicago doesn't care. They'll play the Holiday Inn, and then the next day they'll be playing, Best Western. They don't care as long as they're out there and still performing. That's what they care about most. And I think Neal Schon is a bit like that too, but Steve Perry is not. And I think that's where some of their permanent rift lies. And then there's Jonathan Cain, which is a whole other topic. And Jonathan Cain was the point person. He was the bearer of the bad news. But I think the reason Neal Schon and Steve Perry, are still having trouble these days is that Perry just decided a long time ago that he didn't want to have anything to do with this anymore. And I think Neal Schon probably mellowed a bit over the years, and maybe Perry did too. But Perry, again, doesn't do anything without a ton of thought, and he's very methodical, and it doesn't have to be anytime soon. And if Perry has music to release, it doesn't have to be anytime soon. I mean, he's 72. Neal is 67. I think John Cain is 70. So these guys, they're not getting any younger. And if they ever were going to get back together again, they got to do it soon. Will they? Probably not. But again, that's my theory. Neal Schon and Steve Perry. It's, the ball is in Steve Perry's court. So if he wants to smack it back to Neal, he can. If not, he'll just let the ball drop in somewhere and walk away. And it doesn't really matter to him. I think Steve Perry has accomplished everything that he wants to. And I think that's part of the reason why, this will never get resolved, and it doesn't necessarily need to be resolved, but it is something that people always ask about. And I think they'll ask about it until one of them retires or the other one is not here anymore. And we hope that both of them are around for many, many years to come. All right, that's my super long video on this topic, but it is one that people seem to care about. And there are other parts to this story. And maybe in the days ahead, I will go back to 1987 and do my speculation about that. Or, just how Perry came to the band and he didn't really feel comfortable in the band. Like he felt like he was an outsider. And I think that relates to a lot of his prior experiences. You can kind of see that, Perry kind of needed things his own way. He was kind of an only child, right? So there tends to be a different kind of approach to things. Whereas these other guys, they were like, hey, man, it's the 3 Musketeers, the 5 Musketeers, whatever, 4 Musketeers. But Perry, he wanted to be his own Musketeer and have his own bus. And for some time he did.